Welcome to the Performance Formula with Jody Martins.
So, Albert, officially welcome to the Performance Formula podcast. It is really, really awesome having you here. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you, Jody, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Albert, maybe just by way of introduction, if you can maybe just share a quick little bit about who you are, what you do, so that the listeners sort of
Sure.
can get a sense of what we're going to chat about.
Sure. My name is Albert Bramante. I am the agent and owner of Bramante Artists. We are a talent agency in New York, and I represent actors for film, TV, theater, commercial, print, voiceover. And I've been doing this for about 21 years now. And I also have a Ph.D. in psychology, so I have a background in, mindset coaching and NLP, and just, different mindset shifts that are, really essential for performing artists.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think we often don't think that performance in the way that I at times speak about it here on the podcast is often about sports performance. And we wouldn't initially think that TV actors and these types of people also need talent and be able to perform to some degree. And so I'm really excited for this conversation to see what we can learn from you.
Oh, great. I'm really happy to share what I can, what can help the audience along.
Yeah, brilliant. So Albert, I start the podcast with this question. If there was such a thing as a formula for performance, with all your knowledge, all your experience, all your understanding, from your worldview, etc., what do you think we need to consider as part of a formula for people to be able to perform at their best?
That's a really good question. And there's a combination of factors. It's not just one particular factor. Having a talent is important. Whether you're an actor, an athlete, a speaker, a coach, the talent is important. That includes the knowledge in your field, the ability to perform on short notice, but also having a business set point too, knowing your type and your brand. Brand awareness is extremely important. Just like with any business, just like, actors being completely aware of who they are and what they can offer is also very important. So talent plus brand awareness. I would say also business acuity, acumen, or how you want to look at that, or intuition. And also the fourth element, which is the most important, is perseverance, which can also be looked at tenacity. So I would say those four elements, like branding, talent, branding, business sense, and perseverance.
I mean, I love that. It's completely different to what people normally say. It's completely different, which I think will make this conversation pretty interesting. If we can think of sort of this idea of talent, right? What's your understanding of that? Like, what is talent exactly?
Talent is the ability to perform at your very best and to really do what's asked of you. Now, in my world, it's being able to commit to a role, being able to go into character, being able to be authentic and realistic as that character, as playing that character. Because essentially you're reading words on a page or words in a script and bringing that script to life and bringing that character to life so that it seems like it's really happening and it's not acting. And I use air quotes for acting because that was phony. So being the truth. Now, again, performance can mean different elements in different domains, whether it's being an effective public speaker, being a competitive athlete, or, being an effective coach.
Yeah, I am liking what you're saying. So I'm going to ask you this question, but it might be a bit weird. So I know of a fast bowler in cricket. I don't know how much you know about cricket necessarily, but I know of a fast bowler in cricket who, in a podcast episode, sort of referenced himself as playing a character on the sports field.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of what he mentioned was that the character he plays is actually very draining on him. And he had to then learn to adapt sort of how he warms up and does all sort of things that,
Mm-hmm.
because it burns quite a lot of energy to play this character. And so I always thought that maybe it's because that character is not authentic. That was sort of my whole sense about it. But I'm curious to sort of get your sense of that when people step into characters, right? And from a performance point of view, how do we make sure that it's authentic or that it's real?
Well, the key is to bring in elements of yourself into that character. So in other words, it would be, whatever you can bring. So like, what could Jody bring to this character? What can, what are you, when are you upset? How do you act? So put somebody in front of you. Like if we're just saying you were angry, put someone who made you mad in front of you. Or think of a situation that made you sad or happy, depending on what the character's emotions are. But the key is to bring in elements of yourself into that character, because when otherwise it's not going to be authentic. Then it's going to look like I'm playing pretend,
Yeah.
and that's not going to really influence the performance in any other way. The downside of that, and I can identify with what that player was mostly saying, it's draining. Because, whether you're on stage, if you're performing on stage, you're sometimes doing this for hours a day, months at a time. Or even if you're working on a film set, that can be several months of playing this character. And that can be draining after a while. That's why, like, unfortunately, there's a high degree of substance use in the performing arts industry because of the escapism that's sometimes needed. Because of the pain and trauma that it brings up. Because especially sometimes playing these characters can bring up trauma in the own actor's life, their personal life, which can then, make things worse, sometimes.
Yeah. So talent is the ability to perform at your best. We've got this idea of that it's authentic and realistic, but it seems like you're talking about a bit of a dark side, right? That exists in this space too.
It
Yeah.
can be. It can be. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a potential. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people are talking about that. And I wish they were. Because a lot of times we want to get that great performance out of that actor. And they do deliver, but there's a cost to that sometimes. And sometimes there's no outlet afterwards that's kind of like, okay, now that's over. Let it go.
Yeah. I'm sort of aware of, and I don't know the whole story, but say somebody like Heath Ledger playing the Batman Joker character, and I think he committed suicide. I don't know if it was directly related to the movie or the character he played there or not. I'm not 100% clear on that, but
I'm
but
sure
I
it
think
has
that might be an example of what you're talking about. Yeah.
100%. And again, there's no complete 100% proof that it was a suicide. But we can kind of say it could have been that the dark, the Dark Knight could have been the culmination, the climax, but it could have been something like building up for years.
Yeah.
And it was just going to that place, because that's what they teach you a lot in acting school, especially what we call method acting, which is some of the classics, is they, to go deep into that role.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and just really, go into it, which can sometimes be costly.
Would it be something or equatable to like becoming something that you're not then, if you go that deep into being that type of character?
Of course, but I mean, at the same time, you're still bringing parts of you. But
Okay.
what starts to happen is you might start embodying the emotions of that character.
Yeah.
There was, I'm not going to mention the name or the name of the movie, the name of the actor, but an actor spent weeks on preparing for a dark role, a serial killer. And the way he prepared for it was he spent about a month, secluded from his family in a hotel room. He watched hours on end of, serial killer interviews, and then had crime scene photos splashed upon the walls of the hotel that he would sit and stare at for hours. After the filming was over, he said he almost had fantasies of killing the lead actress, and he needed therapy. He needed to go to a lot of therapy afterwards. to kind of compress from that. Now, of course, I think, my personal viewpoint is that might have been a little too extreme preparation. So I'm kind of maybe, figuring out ways, even using my NLP and hypnosis experience, if there's a way we can get that same performance, but at a less of a personal cost. Being able to go into and then also come out of character.
Yeah. But I think then you mentioned earlier, right, that knowing who we are is actually then super important, because that creates the baseline for you to come back to. So if you don't know who you are yet, you might actually just get lost completely.
Exactly. And knowing yourself is and that's why, there's so many coaches out there that are, helping people know who they are. And I think the same applies for actors. It's like, yeah, you're an actor, but who are you? And that's the whole point, is like getting to know yourself. I mean, even with the actors I work with in my agency, it's like one of the, I guess, the green flags, you would say, is an actor who knows himself. That's one people I really want to have on my roster, because you know what you can and you know what you cannot do, or you know what you're comfortable with, and you also know what you're not comfortable with, because you know yourself.
Yeah. Is there anything that you think performers can do to know themselves more?
Soul searching. You can go to a coach, a therapist. Doing some active reflection on a daily basis, meditation on a daily basis, writing, journaling, sometimes even just sitting still. Now, I know a lot of people may not like meditation, but I do feel like it's so helpful, just to sit and come up with thoughts, whatever thought comes to your mind, and do not censor those thoughts. Just write whatever comes down, or take note of whatever comes in. And also, as far as an actor, one thing I often say is look at the roles you're typically cast in, too. What, versus what you want. Because sometimes what you want might be different than what comes out.
Yeah, I like that. I can relate that to sport very easily. Sometimes athletes want to play a specific part, but cricket, they want to bat in a certain position, or football, they want to play in a certain position on the field, but they keep getting picked into a part that they don't want to be in. But that should actually be a message. Hey, this is maybe showing you of who you currently perceived as being by others, Yeah.
Well, because there's certain limitations, I imagine, even with positions on football, that, your size and your height may not be a good fit. No matter how much you want it, and you might be, very skilled at what you do, but it might not physically work. And just like with certain roles for actors, there's so many things that are outside of your control about landing that role, that, you could give a really dynamic performance or an excellent audition, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get the role. The important thing is, as an actor and I'm sure as a player, is to do your best and deliver the absolute best. Some things are not in your control. However, also, one of the wisest things to be able to do is let go of the things that are not in your control.
Sure. How do you, because I know you've got this background in psychology and NLP, right? How do you see that stuff, if I can call it that, right? Like all the mind things, all the mind things. How do you see that influence an ability to perform?
I absolutely, and this is, again, I'm biased because of my background. I'll be, transparent on that. But I feel it's 100% integral, really important and crucial for success. Because when you're, let's say, having a bad day, or you're not in a, optimal mood, your mind starts ruminating. You start, thinking in tangents, and start getting in your head, like, maybe this isn't the right role for me. Maybe I didn't prepare well. And so then you freeze when you go for that moment, whether it's the moment on the field or your moment in an audition room. You freeze at that moment. And that freezing can make or break the difference whether you get get the role or be on the team or make that goal or not. So having that mindset is being able to take away that anxiety or that fear or that pressure and be able to do your very best. Now, this doesn't replace practice or training. Every performer in every aspect needs solid performance and solid technical training. We're not, this is not a substitute for that. But if I can get you to be at your best 100%, then I think you'll do a lot better, and more efficient.
Yeah. The process for actors, I want to say athletes, so I'm looking for the A word, and then I realize it's not athletes. The process for an actor, right, to become, I suppose, a good actor. What does that look like?
Training.
Yeah.
A lot of training. And doesn't this have to be like Juilliard or Yale, any prestigious program? Just consistent training. Even local classes.
Mm-hmm.
At your theater or local. Look for local acting schools, and just get consistent training. But that also practice. Because of the cameras now and everybody's every cell phone is a camera. Start filming yourself doing scenes, doing monologues, playing different roles, filming little skits. Because the more you it's like playing an instrument or even playing on a field. The more you practice. Same thing with an athlete. We have to keep practicing. I was reading an article once that Michael Jordan, sometimes will spend 5,000 throws a day, like shoots a day. Even when he's not, even off the off season, not just on the on season.
Yeah.
If it's more than that. And he's one of the best, the best of all time. But yet, he didn't get there by accident. I imagine that 5,000 a day contributed much to that success. Of course, he probably did have some natural talents, but I think that there was, that practice, that hard persistence. The same thing with acting. You have to practice daily.
I don't know, right? I'm very curious about this stuff. What is it that actors practice? I mean, we get to see them in the movies, maybe. Like that's all. That's like my only frame of reference. Or I've gone to a couple of stage shows where you see them on a theater stage.
Yeah.
Sorry, just you speaking about this idea of being authentic, right? So now I'm going like, okay, well, how much practice does there have to be for me to be me? And maybe I just need a bit of confidence and a script, and I can just go stand there. Or is there more to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are not in the field might say that. Oh, I can just do this. It's hard because number one, you have to do it for hours on end, and when you're filming, something, they could shoot it 50 or 60 different takes from different angles, and you have to deliver each time consistently the same emotion, the same intensity every time, which is not, which is hard, it can be hard to do. And also you have lights on you, you have a camera on you, which is a lot different than pretend. Or even on stage, you're going to have an audience and you're going to have spotlights on you constantly from all different angles. You have to be able to perform and be able to do that a moment's notice. So practice would be taking scenes, reading plays, reading film scripts, and just practice playing different characters. Because you have, the goal for being an actor is to read someone else's words and make them your own. Because every TV show, every play that you see, every film that you watch has external writers in that the actors are just really being paid to read the script. And if they do a great job, you even forget you're watching a movie.
I tell you what I like about what you're sort of answering there is I've never really thought of it in this way, right? But if you think of, say, a sports athlete, technically they can be actors too. And technically they are, right? But what athletes tend to do and what we tend to talk about quite a lot on the podcast is they tend to focus a lot on technique. And so one of the examples I use is, and I don't know if it's right, you can happily tell me I'm wrong. I say it's, to me, if we spend a lot of time on the technical side of the game, then it is like an actor standing in front of the mirror, practicing their eyebrow raise. And that's sort of all they're doing. They're just practicing, okay, can I raise my eyebrow like this? And they're getting into the technicality of how they want their face to look. But they completely forget to convey the emotion, right? So I often use that as an example. Now, I'm sure there might be times actors might have to go stand in front of a mirror so that they can see what their face actually looks like. I want to portray joy. Does my face actually look joyful? But it's not the primary thing that they spend most of their time on.
Yeah.
Where with athletes, we find that a lot of the time that's the primary thing. They like sports like golf, cricket, your technically more demanding sports. A high volume of practice is on the technique. And so I love to maybe through this conversation suggest that, hey, we can actually practice some acting from a performance point of view. Like, what is the emotion I want to portray when I'm out on the field? How do I want to show up? How do I want to show myself? How do I want to walk? How do I want to talk? How do I want to appear? What's the character I want to play in my performance? And it might just simplify a lot of the mental game stuff down to something really simple. That's sort of what I'm getting so far out of this conversation, that if we position it as something like that, it could make a lot of things easier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where, again, where the training comes in. And that's why, a lot of young, what I call aspiring actors come out, and that's why they wind up either choking, on stage or on set, because they're not ready for that. I mean, some of the best actors on TV will, put in like notations, giggle after I say this word, or, again, raise my eyebrows after I say this word. And they'll do it take after take. So whether it's take 1 or take 30, it's the same giggle after saying a word. So that's what we mean by the technical side of things. So it comes off as authentic, and not trying to make pretend play, because then it looks phony and you're going to lose the audience. And the same thing I would imagine being an athlete, knowing where to stand, where to block, where to, maybe when to yell or maybe when not, not to, and sometimes it's also a bit of improvisation too, where good preparation also makes you to have the room to improv, because things can go different on set, or things can go different on the field too. So, and just being ready for that.
Yeah, I'm going to steal so many things out of this conversation. To be perfect.
I'm glad you did. Yeah,
I might just relabel all sorts of parts of my coaching based on this conversation so far. Like I'm really enjoying this. I'm curious about. I had like a couple of questions in my head before the time, so it might seem like we're jumping around a little bit, but I'm curious about sort of in the immediate moment, why is it that some actors are only successful on TV and we don't see them in movies a lot, and vice versa? Is that a genre thing? Is it an organizational thing? Is it an acting thing?
It could be. Some actors, are contracted with certain studios. I mean, that was the old way of looking at things, where you might have an actor signed for 5 years at ABC. So they're only really contracted to play on ABC, shows, or NBC. Films, it also depends on the caliber of the actor and the caliber of the film. Because there's a lot of also small indie films that may not make it to mainstream TV. And some of these actors may be a part of that. Or you might also see them, an off-Broadway or a regional theater production when they're not filming, that TV show, which can sometimes take things up. And then some actors prefer to do TV versus film. It really depends on the individual actor, what they're typically getting cast on. But typically, if you have, let's say, a contract role, I mean, in TV, it's like if you're on every episode of a series, then you're on a contract. And that contract can sometimes prevent you from working on other projects that will compete for time.
Yeah, so then it depends on how successful that TV series is. And so if it's very successful, you will never do a movie in your life because you're doing this one thing, basically.
Yeah, or at least the time when you're filming while the show is in production.
Okay.
you'll be doing that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Okay. So I thought it might be something different, right? I thought it might be that there's specific skills and things that's related to, and talents, say, that's related to
Mhm.
movies versus TV, that there might be something in that too. Or is that,
Could be, but it, it depends. I mean, it's a similar, but it's also a different medium. TV sometimes is a little faster
yeah,
than film.
yeah,
Like they may shoot an entire TV episode in 8 or 9 days versus 4 to 6 months for a film.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, earlier you mentioned about, so I've been fortunate enough that I've been involved with a movie one time in my life, back in South Africa, where
Hmm.
they had some characters play cricket players. And so myself and my business partner at the time coached the two main actors to walk, not necessarily talk, but be able to walk and move and play and do the technical side of the game as much as
Hmm.
possible to at least make it look like they could play cricket. And so what was really cool is we got the opportunity to then go to the actual shooting days of the cricket scenes and got to be behind the scenes and throw the balls and sort of make suggestions on no, that's not ideally that's not how it looks.
Yeah.
um, and so for me, I learned a lot from that experience. I learned a lot about how these sort of things are organized and structured. Everything is planned down to the last detail.
Hmm.
um, Seen this, take that, as there's somebody making notes, there's somebody wardrobe, there's somebody checking the makeup that would run on and say, oops, nope, we saw on that last shot that your makeup's a bit off, like let's fix that, let's do it again. And so I got this idea in my head about athletes can almost like practice their character in the same way. Not actors, athletes can practice their character in the same way, right? How am I authentically
Yeah.
me in a performance? What emotions do I want to
Hmm.
experience? And then there's this whole
100%.
there's this
Yes.
whole process to, in my understanding, the movie industry, right, and the filming industry, and sort of how all of that plays out. I'm sort of wondering how you prepare people for that. Like, is that also just sort of exposure and they get to learn about it, or in your field, do you take time to sort of teach people like how all of that stuff works? What are these processes? What is a good process to have as an actor? You know?
Well, I mean, that's where training comes in. Now, I'm not an acting,
Yeah,
coach or trainer, so I make that very clear
yeah.
from the get go. That they should always get training,
Mm,
always
okay.
go for actual conservatory training. So a lot of that's going to also happen in that role, taking on camera classes, learning the mechanics of being on camera,
Mm,
how to work with the camera,
yeah,
you know, how to work with the lighting, yeah, and all of that. That's where technical training comes in.
yeah.
What I can do is help you with the mindset, the fears,
Mm,
the anxieties, and and so that you can now use your training for maximum impact.
mm, yeah. Okay. So you are studied as a psychologist, as well as you've got a NLP, and I'm not sure what else, right? Sort of think
Yeah, hypnosis, a
hypnosis,
little bit of hypnosis too.
a little bit
Yeah.
of hypnosis. Um, so I have a background in NLP, and as we call it, meta NLP. And so I'm curious because we got taught, rightly or wrongly so, that NLP is quite different to psychology. Psychology, as it was explained to us, was that that's the study of human brokenness. And
Yeah, I mean,
NLP is
I
almost like the flip side of that. So I'm curious with somebody like you that have actually had exposure to both, what your take is on that.
well, that's somewhat true. I think maybe a little simplistic
Mhm.
about psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. We have focused a lot on what's wrong with people, but there's also a lot of what's right with people too. So even before I started studying NLP, I was very much into positive psychology, resiliency, and growth, and opportunities to turn pain and trauma into growth. And that's why I feel like the hypnosis and NLP is a great fit for me for that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I like to kind of focus on what goes right with people. And, and that's where I feel like the NLP has come in really handy.
Yeah. So, and I like how you put that, right? Using trauma to sort of get forward in life rather than let it hold you back. I'm not using your exact words, but
and that's very true, though. It is getting ahead in its healing and making, how can you channel it into, become a better you? And let's focus on that.
Yeah. So I'm always reminded of the idea of like I don't know what the art is called, the Japanese art where they take like broken plates. I think it's Japanese. And then they put like gold in the cracks to fix the plates. I don't know if you know about that. I can't remember the name of it.
I don't know if the exact name of it, but it sounds like a form of alchemy.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's almost like in your brokenness, you find some healing, and you find something spectacular, actually. So
exactly, it's like you're finding some gold, inner gold.
Yeah. So if you think of the sort of actors you work with, what would you say are some of their biggest struggles, battles, things that they have to overcome in order to be able to be authentic and themselves in front of all of this stuff, right? The lights and the cameras.
I think one of the biggest battle is self-doubt that comes in. Because in this profession, I think all performers in general, but especially actors, there's no stability. There's no guarantees. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You don't know technically when your next paycheck is going to come in. So the not knowing, I think, really affects a lot of people, even though initially they're going home when they graduate, they're all excited, but in a couple of years, of getting these no's from these auditions wears them down, and there's a high burnout rate. So I think the self-doubt, imposter syndrome comes in, like, am I really doing this right? Plus, they may get pressure from their families too. Like, I know several clients who've, over the years told me that their parents wanted them to be a doctor or be a lawyer, and here they're choosing an actor, which is kind of like, if you have a family that's not artistic, it's going to be difficult for them to understand. So you're dealing with family pressure too.
How would you suggest if somebody struggles with self-doubt? How would you suggest they go about that?
Well, remember that I would also using a little NLP, look at the language you use to yourself. So one thing I discourage heavily from any actor is to use the word starving artist or struggling artist in their lexicon or vocabulary. So rather than repeating the mantra, I'm a professional working actor. Because if you went for training, you're a professional now. So you're a professional working actor. That's the biggest thing to have. Mindset to have. And also keep a log of all your successes and all your wins. And they don't have to be like huge wins, it can be small. You get good feedback from a performance, you get good feedback from a coach. You land that audition, you get a call back, or you get a second, interview from that audition. Or you get praise from an audience member on stage, or a good review. Document all of that, so that when moments of self-doubt creep in, you pull out that file, that document, which has it. In my book, I call it the happy file.
Oh, I like that.
Pull out your happy file.
I like that. Pull out your happy file.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all need happy files. I think we all need
every one of us.
Most
yes,
probably not just
absolutely.
actors. We all have those moments when we get down on ourselves. So what I'm hearing you suggest is that in order to combat self-doubt, you're suggesting that we have some proactive thing that we're doing. Doing like create the happy file, as well as we're aware of how we talk with ourselves. We've got to be aware of the things we're saying to ourselves about ourselves. And in particular, you sort of reference an I am statement, which talks to identity, right? So I am a starving or struggling artist versus I am a professional,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also visualization too is important. That goes with anybody, not just actors. Anytime you're going to give a performance, or like even for an athlete, the day before a match or a game, spend some time visualizing yourself. Visualize winning, visualize doing really well on the field, and same thing with actors. It's not so much getting the Oscar or the Emmy, but visualize yourself saying the lines easily, the audience reacting positively, your scene partners reacting positively, and run that through your head several times, because the interesting about the brain does not know the difference between reality and imagination. So you'll already be primed for success when you visualize. It's very simple, but it's also very profound.
Yeah. Have you got any? I like the idea of sort of visualization. My sense is it's a word that we throw about. A lot of people know and understand. Okay, it's this thing where you maybe sit, close your eyes, and you see pictures going through your mind. Have you got any sort of guidelines or thoughts on how to do that effectively?
Well, I mean, pretty much, I would say not just pictures, run it like a movie, not just a series of pictures, but run it like a movie where you're actually in your mind watching. Another thing we could do, like in NLP, is like the whole movie theater metaphor. Like you're sitting in a movie theater watching yourself on screen do this. And, then step into the screen, like the second, position.
Yeah.
You step into the screen and now you're reenacting this and you're a part of it.
Yeah.
So start off watching and then go into it. And then, go with, as you show, with, the modalities, see it, feel it, hear it, and really get into that experience.
Yeah.
And then run that at least several times before you go to perform. And I always like offering challenges like that to people. Like, just do it for 10 days, see what happens. And it might not be a monumental shift, like, where it's like right away, like it's going to be, but little shifts. You may notice that you're performing a lot better, or at least more confidently. And it's gradual.
Yeah. You've got and I mean I agree with that, right? And I appreciate you sort of suggesting it in that way, right? Like my sense is with a lot of the mental performance stuff, it's all very simple. Like go sit and visualize, play a movie through your mind, be in the movie. The difficulty often comes in when people have to actually do it. That's the more mental part. The mental part is not saying I'm practicing my visualization, or I'm doing my breathing, or my meditation, or my mindfulness, or my journaling. Like I can sit down and write in a book. That's fairly easy to do. But the difficult part is the getting to do it. So there's this little gap in my mind that exists between people visualizing, breathing, meditating, and making that a consistent practice and getting the benefit from that we know over time is quite significant. What have you find sort of as good strategies to help close that gap?
Well, I would say commit to it. Put it on your calendar. Even if it's 5 minutes, a 5-minute burst when you're on the train, or if you're obviously not driving, but if you're like a passenger in a car, in your bedroom when you wake up right before you go to bed, or even if right before the match you step into the bathroom in the restroom and just do it for 5 minutes and just close your eyes and just go right into it. So make time for it, because the biggest thing is procrastination, which is going to be a major problem that we all have. Is procrastination. We say, well, I know I have to visualize, but I'll do it later. And then later never happens.
Yeah. So like small size, consistent, maybe at a time that's convenient is what I'm sort of hearing you saying. I'm just putting different words to it, but that's sort of what I'm hearing, right?
And even schedule some time too.
Yeah.
If you have to put it on your calendar, say, okay, I need to take a 5 or 10 minute break in between
Yeah.
Every 2 hours,
Yeah.
and just and visualize.
Yeah.
But the way it's gonna be successful is if you're consistent about it.
Yeah.
Consistency is key.
Consistency is key. Yeah. You've got I've looked at your website. There's quite a lot of hypnosis types of tracks and things that people can listen to. To you, like, what is hypnosis to you, and what is the benefit that gives to athletes or actors?
Well, hypnosis works. I would say helps you connect to your inner power.
Okay.
Like, we have all the resources we need,
Yeah.
to succeed. But, life can get in the way, our emotions can get in the way, our programming that we receive from our parents and society can get in the way. So it's for me, the way I look at it, it's like removing all of that and connecting to your truth and your inner power. And with these tapes, the important thing is to be consistent about it. Popping in at one time isn't going to work. I'd say at least 30 days, once a day for 30 days.
Yeah.
And keep track of the results. Again, they're not, it's not magic. Like where it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to listen to a recording, and now all of a sudden I'm going to be able to either perform or run, a 500, 500-meter marathon.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that dramatic, but you start seeing small shifts.
Yeah.
Over time.
Yeah. I don't know how to ask this question. My head's, I'm thinking sort of, you said hypnosis taps into the hidden power, right? I have this understanding about the conscious mind, the subconscious, unconscious mind. So if you're saying hidden power, I'm assuming this is my assumption, right? That it's the sort of quietening of the conscious mind, getting the subconscious, unconscious to be more at the forefront, right? Less sort of critical, less less judgy about ourselves, more free. And I know in acting there's or I've always watched on The Voice. When my wife and I used to watch that, the coaches, they would always say, "You're in your head. You got to get out of your head." And then I think this is the sort of mechanism, is that they're overthinking it. They're too conscious about what's happening, rather than having that conscious mind sort of switched off a little bit and be able to just express their natural ability, almost like as a free flow rather than as a controlled thing.
Rather than evaluating it. So, even when someone's like in a trance and a thought comes to the head, the first thing we'll ask somebody is, tell me the first thing that comes to your head. Don't censor it. Because usually that's the truth.
Yes.
So, and that's why, like in hypnosis, we have the relaxation in the beginning. Another misconception is that you don't necessarily have to have relaxation for hypnosis to take place. I mean, we watch a TV commercial. You get a good salesperson. They're using hypnosis. But it definitely does help to have that relaxation. So usually when every track you listen to, there's going to be a few moments where, I'll be or anybody else will be guiding you into a, relaxed state. Because then you're more receptive to hearing the messages and receiving those messages.
Yeah. Yeah, that is pretty unique, because I've noticed that whenever you buy or engage with anybody who does hypnosis stuff or visualization, or visualization, that normally before the time they're sort of just, okay, let's slow down. Is that to sort of get out of that conscious mind and sort of just leave it at peace a little bit and say, yeah.
Because the conscious mind tends to be analytical, judging, and that needs to be kind of distracted, in a sense, by relaxing.
Yeah.
Now so the unconscious mind is open.
Would you say that if somebody does say hypnosis or meditation, mindfulness, breathing, would you say that by practicing that, they're getting their minds more ready for performance because they sort of have an understanding of how to switch off that conscious part? Or is it?
Yeah. Well, That's exactly right. It's the nerves. You're
Mm.
switching off those nerves.
Okay.
And that's when you can be more organic and more, authentic in your performance, when you set the nerves part off.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to kind of see, maybe the process could be before, right before a performance or right before an audition, you go into a brief trance,
Mm.
hypnotic trance process,
Yeah.
and then go right out and do that.
Yeah.
Because if you've ever watched like stage shows, for instance, you'll see, like the hypnosis comedy shows, or where they do the demonstrations, and people will do these amazing feats in front of groups of people. I mean, and people are like, "Oh, this is magic." No, it's not. You just removed their inhibitions. That's all you've done. So all you're doing is seeing a more relaxed version of these people on stage.
Yeah.
It's not changing who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of nice how we've sort of stumbled through a couple of different things, but we're ending back where we started.
Yeah.
About sort of, in order to be your most authentic self, in order to maybe then play your character, your actor, whether you're an actor or whether you're an athlete, to play that character as authentically as possible is to remove the things that might hold you back from playing that character. It's not necessarily about being more of who you are. It's saying, well, there's potentially these things that are standing in my way, which very often, as we've discovered in this conversation, which very often, if not always, is the stuff that you carry with you in your mind. And it's, if we have a way of sort of circumventing that. And so hypnosis could be one way, priming maybe through all the sort of skills that you've suggested, visualization, journaling, mindfulness, etc. We can prime our mind that when we get into performance, we can show up as that authentic version of ourselves, because
100%.
Because we don't have that filter in place that says, no, you shouldn't be doing this. Are you going to be okay? You can just go, let's go. Let's do this thing. Yeah. I've sort of spent a long time reverse engineering, I think, my understanding of mental performance, in the sense that, a lot of the time when you study, you sort of start at the beginning and you work your way forward. But I've sort of taken an approach for a couple of years now where I started at the end. I said, okay, but hang on. When athletes are at their best, how do they describe that? Like, how does and I'm sure, I'm almost certain in the acting world it'll be the same. Like, it was a blur. I can't remember much. I didn't think a lot. I didn't have a lot of emotion. I kind of just played. It just kind of happened, right? It was just an expression sort of me in that moment. And so I think sometimes we neglect that. We take that for granted. It's like we're not pursuing that. We sometimes just want to tick a whole bunch of boxes to say, oh, I've achieved, I've done. But we forget that when we're at our best, it's actually that type of experience. And I think what this conversation has sort of done is saying, well, that is true, maybe with it just a different lens on it, right? I think when somebody's authentic, they're being themselves, they're expressing, it'll be easier to have that experience than if they're not.
Yes. Well, I mean, what you just described with them seeing the blurs, all that's a hypnotic trance.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, 100%.
That's a hypnotic trance. And that was brought up by natural, without a facilitator. That was just by getting in the flow, and your subconscious took over.
Yeah.
Which means all your training and everything just took over, and you gave a really good performance. And I would imagine, so that would be some of the actors and performance best work.
Would you say actors get there more often, potentially, the better actors, than, they're able to tap into that more?
Because they take the pressure away. Like, I was hearing one working actor who still auditions, he said he looks at those 2 minutes from the audition room as a way of working. He's not auditioning, he's working.
Okay.
And he's performing and playing that character. So, and he looks at it like another thing, kind of using a little bit of language, instead of saying for actors, I have to audition, rather replace it with, I get to audition. In his mind, he says, I get to perform for 2 minutes. He goes, whether I get the job or not, that's immaterial. I'm having fun performing.
Yeah. I like that.
And I believe that mostly led to his success, too.
So
because he took the stakes out of it.
yeah, so that's sort of like a subtle reframe that he's basically doing. Instead of thinking about it in
Yes.
this way, I'm going to think about it in this way. And this way gets me to have my conscious mind less involved. I don't know if he necessarily goes through all of that, but that's sort of the mechanism that he's playing
Yeah.
with, quietening down the conscious
I mean,
mind so
you know,
that
he's not,
subconsciously.
he is going through it. He just may not know that that's what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure, Albert. I think I've loved this conversation. we've
Yeah, it was a great one. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
yeah, we've sort of stumbled our way through it, but I think it's sort of come full circle, and I'm definitely, like, every conversation on the podcast impacts me in some way, and this one certainly has. Like, I work with athletes a lot in both the technical as well as mental space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this idea of, that you can be an actor, to see your performance rather as an acting sort of thing, and we can focus more on what character you are when you go play. I think
100%, yes.
I think it opens up the doorway to a bunch of mental performance conversations in a very simple way, and it makes it easy to reference. We're talking about your character now that you're playing. How is that? How is your emotion? How is your thinking? How are you showing up? How are you walking? How are you talking? What if that stumbling block comes along your way? How are you acting then? How does your character stay
exactly
true to themselves? And so, yeah, I've never really thought of it that way. And I from my side, I want to say thank you for your time and sort of contributing to this conversation.
Well, thank you again for having me on the show.
Yeah, brilliant. Albert, if anybody, I don't know how many actors are necessarily going to reach out, but maybe somebody listens to this, says, hey, this is somebody that I might want to connect with. How would they be able to do that? That website
you
with
can
all your
follow
hypnosis.
Yeah. You can follow my Instagram at Dr. Albert Bramante. You can also go to my website if you're interested in the downloads. We have downloads for everything.
Yeah.
Whether it's, addictions, fears, performance related, sports perform. We have a lot of sports performing tracks. So feel free to go there and reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you.
Cool. And what is that website?
It's my first name, last name, albertbramante.com.
Perfect. I'll make sure that that's all in the links below.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this.
All right. Thank you.